I was hands down the worst BDR on the floor.
Would you have fired younger you?
Yeah.
Wow.
When I got there, they had not set an outbound meeting in years.
Welcome to another episode of the Modern Sales Leader Podcast. We're here to share battle-tested tips and tricks that you can go adopt and implement into your own business to see more success right away. Today's conversation is with Joe Venuti. He's been a sales leader for years. Big focus on running SDR and BDR teams, but also running full cycle right now as a leader. We talk about what makes a good sales hire, SDR and BDR onboarding essentials, how to have hard conversations with reps when they're doing well, but they're not engaged, and also the future of outbound. So buckle up. This is going to be a great episode. Let's roll. Joe Venuti in the house, and he's here to share all of his wisdom from being a multiple-time sales dev leader into now a full cycle sales manager, crushing it. And yeah, he's here to share all the wisdom. So Joe, thanks for being here, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So for all of us who don't know you yet, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So obviously my name is Joe Venuti. I grew up in Boston, spent about 11 years working for a contract security company when I was in college, and then got promoted up. And that was my first exposure to leadership, but not sales.
Not sales.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No. And then there was a layoff, and I didn't know what to do with myself. It was probably short-sighted, but I was young and naive, and I never envisioned not working for that company. It was a BDR for an appointment setting company. And he said, come interview. You can talk. You'll be good at this. So I did. I interviewed. I got the job, went through 2 weeks of training, got on the phone, made like 4 cold calls and booked an appointment. And I was like, I could have made $1 million over the last 11 years. I wasted all this time. And then I didn't book another appointment for like 4 weeks. So I was hands down the worst BDR on the floor out of 200. And this went on for, 3 or 4 months. It was brutal, and I hated sales, and I was thinking about my next move because it wasn't going to work. And then luckily it all clicked. Eventually they had a leadership spot open and another promotion coming up to Arizona, which is where I live now. And yeah, pivoting to the tech space, and then eventually made my way to GMI, holding a bunch of different roles. I was sales manager, director of sales, then became a VP running a sales dev team, and then made my way to GMI to run their sales.
So just like that, you go from no sales for years into a sales role, 4th call, book a meeting. By the way, do you remember how that meeting felt when you booked it?
Yeah. I was shocked that he said yes, right? Like in hindsight, looking back on it now, and I had like 3 sentences on a piece of paper, and I just read them, and I got really lucky. They were looking at disaster recovery software, and I was like, we got the latest.
Oh, wow.
I didn't even know what disaster recovery was at that point, if I'm being honest. And he's like, yeah, sure, I'll talk about that. And I kind of froze. I was like, okay, like, where's my notepad? I got to get your info.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be that easy. I was like, man, like, how did I not find this before? But I was sadly mistaken. It is much, much harder than that.
That's hilarious. Then you went into disaster recovery because you didn't book a meeting for a month after that. That sucks.
Yeah.
Did you start feeling like imposter syndrome and all that?
Yeah. And I don't even know that I felt imposter syndrome. The previous 11 years, I was running a security team, right? Like everything from the cameras and card readers and like security guards in the lobby of the building. That's what I was doing. I got a little bit of exposure to the sales side, but I was never responsible for selling it. And then here I am, like, struggling. And the team that I happened to land on had the 2 top performers in the entire company. And it was just demoralizing. Like, there was nothing to even imposter yet. I just wasn't good at the job. And it was very, everybody, I got 1 lucky call in there. And, I think the lesson that I learned from all of it was it takes a fair amount of grit in sales and being competitive. Growing up playing sports, like, I didn't want to quit, but I knew there was a real chance I was going to get fired. But over my first 3 or 4 months, I had become really good friends with one of the top performers on my team. And I just started to ask questions. I was like, listen, like, you've been doing this a lot. You're better than me. I get it. But there's no way you're 100% better than me. But that's what the dashboard's. Like, what? Like,
100%, yeah.
Like, how am I missing the mark so bad? So fortunately, this was in an office with like the low-cut cubes back in the day. He's like, move into the desk next to me. And just kind of listen. And then, I could just hear his confidence and the repetition and how we went about the job. And then all of a sudden one day, I was booking a meeting a week at this point, which was nowhere near what I needed. I got put on a new campaign. I booked a couple of meetings. And then the next day I booked a couple. And then all of a sudden it was like I was getting 3 a day. But really what I was doing was emulating this guy that had found the secret sauce because he had been there.
Yes.
And
Emulation is so
where
key. So key. I mean, right there, like again, goal of us talking is people can listen to this and steal something right away. If you're a rep out there, all you need to do is find the top performer on your team and make friends with them. Go buy them coffee, snuggle up to them next to their desk, and just learn. I did the same thing coming into my SDR role and took off because of it. Just emulate.
that's exactly what it was. And it was crazy because overnight I went from fearing for my job to now competing with this guy and the top other 3 or 4 every single month for who was the best in the
Yeah.
company. Like I got to a point where, so there was like different levels of BDR, right? It was like just entry level, then senior, and then executive. And it was difficult to get to executive. I mean, you had to be booking like at least 60, 70 appointments a month. So finally got there. Like I felt like I was in the circle, but like everyday commission checks would come and we'd open up our checks and it was like our little thing we'd compare who made more money. And I remember seeing them do that. I was like, look at these freaking jerks. I made like $25 and they could earn $4,000 commission checks. All of a sudden, like I was in the circle and some months I actually beat them. But I think that experience has made me a pretty effective leader because I've learned not to give up on the new hire that struggles, right? New hires are going to struggle. It doesn't come naturally to everybody. But if they've got some grit and they're coachable, you can get them over the hump.
Is that what you think you demonstrated? Because that was going to be my question. Like, would you have fired younger you?
Yeah. Without that experience, I could go so far as to tell you without having that experience in my own personal career, there are some people that I've hired who worked their way up to be managers and directors in my organizations that wouldn't have seen month 2 based on what I saw in the first 2 or 3 months.
Wow.
But
Wow.
I learned to look for work ethic, right? There's a difference between skill and ability. Like I can teach you
Mm,
like I can't teach you to care, but I can teach you the skill. I can
yeah.
teach you the process. And if you're willing to like step outside of your comfort zone a little bit and lose that fear and just kind of throw caution to the wind, anybody can do it.
Yeah. I know you're leading full cycle now, but I hear your years of VP of SDR just in that statement alone because I'm the same way. Hard work beats talent every single day.
Yeah.
And that's like such an SDR mindset right there. I love it. I love it.
It's funny you say that. I think it was, man, back when I became a manager at that first company, that appointment setting company, I think Kevin Durant was in the NBA finals and he gave a press conference and he said something about hard work beats talent when talent ain't working. And I would
Mhm.
use that quote over and over again in my morning meetings because like we were the young and inexperienced team when I first became the manager, right? All the tenured guys were with the tenured managers and we were building from the ground up. And that was kind of our mantra. Lo and behold, we did become the top performing team in the company.
Wow. I think two other stereotypes maybe that you've smashed through this. One being that, you don't have to hit the ground running per se to be successful in sales. The second one though, how old were you when you started that BDR role?
Late 20s. So I started with the security company at 18, like right when I graduated. So I guess it was early,
18.
yeah,
Wow.
so
Okay.
30-ish, 29, 30.
Yeah. Yeah, 29, 30. So one of the other stereotypes is you can't start in sales at that age because, all the recruiters are looking for the young talent and all of that. And I just think it's such a fake fear that we have where it's like, man, if you're going to show up and work hard, that's what we care about as leaders. It's not even about your age. In fact, sometimes being older for me is a better thing because you probably have bills to pay, mouths to feed, and you have wisdom that, an 18-year-old kid doesn't. Both deserve a fair shot, but, there's pros and cons.
I think it's a catch 22 because back when I made this transition into sales, like there was no sales loft or outreach or any of those automation tools yet. Like the company,
Yeah,
the company I
yeah.
worked for was literally outsourced appointment setting, right? So large companies would hire us to call and book appointments for them. And it was $180 a day. That was it. No email, no nothing. We would use a little bit of LinkedIn to maybe get some names. It was our own homegrown CRM. And it really taught me like some of the tricks of the trade, right? Like you could run reports inside of the so you get a list, right? Hey, you've got to set appointments for this company. They're our new client. They need 10 appointments. You got to do it in a month. Okay. But I could go through the list of companies they want us to penetrate, and I could see who in our database had taken meetings before. Working smarter, not harder, right? If I see this one guy who's just, we all know those people, right? They're meeting takers. They're thirsty for knowledge. Or maybe they just can't say no. I don't know. But I could go in and see, hey, this guy's taken 12 meetings over the last 14 months. I'm starting there. Get the low hanging fruit, and then I'll sweat the last couple out. So I think that it was a combination of like working smarter, not harder, but also understanding how to grind and really holding myself accountable to the deadline, right? Hey, I got 1 month to set the end for this one client. Like I've got to commit every day with a plan. Like one of the biggest things I saw back then, and you see it now with AEs and BDRs. People come in every day and they know what they have to accomplish, but they don't really have a plan. I've got these 2 or 3 hot leads that'll close out this client, and then good for me. I get a new client once I close that, and then I get this other client that's really difficult. So I got to spend an hour prospecting and finding new people to call. And I would kind of even knowing what I had to do, and I could tell you where my meetings were coming from. I wasn't just showing up and throwing darts at a board. Maybe they'll stick, maybe they won't. But I was about 80, and I knew where my stuff was coming from. Every now and then you get told, no, you weren't expecting it. Every now and then you happen to get an easier one than you expected. But if you have a good idea, you're on the right path.
Yeah.
And like that organization is the biggest thing. And you see it with anyone that carries a quota. If they come in and they're just spraying and praying, and I get 400 off, SOWs out, and I'm waiting for signature on these 3 things, but I don't know if or when they're coming. How are you going to give me a forecast? And it's no different as a BDA.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the spirit of keeping things very practical, what's the mechanism then to be a rep who's that prepared? Is it actually your calendar and time blocking? Because for me, what I've trained SDRs to do is, hey, you need 15 minutes of prep in the morning and 15 minutes at the end of the day to think about tomorrow and look at tomorrow's calendar and make sure it's all good to go. So if you were to give like a very practical, like, hey, go do this to achieve that knowledge and that foresight of where your meetings are coming from, what does that actually look like?
Yeah, I mean, so time blocking is important. Doing the tasks that are not glorious and they're not fun. Like that's
Yes.
I think like that's another one, right? Like nobody wants to spend hours on LinkedIn to find new names and then go to a data tool to find their phone number and then hope you have the right. Nobody wants to do that. But you have to look at
Yeah.
it as if I do this tomorrow, I get paid a commission. So I really was trying to get the mindset of the work I'm doing today will get me paid tomorrow. And the work I did yesterday is getting me paid today. So I think like that one, but the other thing, like my mindset was really, really owning my book of business. It wasn't just a list of a bunch of accounts and, just trying to pay. Like I really got to know each client I was working for and what they did. And I really get to understand the companies that I was targeting. So I was going in and before personalization was a thing, I was kind of already doing that. And it even relates to like BDRs when they get promoted to AE. Like knowing your book of business is crucial. Like I see it with my team now. Some people I can ask what's going on and they'll talk for 25 minutes about this deal, that,
Yeah.
that, and they know everyone's name and what's coming. And, then other reps are, I'm not really sure. I got to I figure out who this guy is. I got to call this client. And when you compare apples to apples, the first person is usually performing better than the second. It's just a matter of knowing your stuff. Like you've got to own it.
Yeah. One of the simplest things we could do there is a book of business template. And just to kind of briefly explain it, it'd be like your accounts are all of the rows and your columns would be basically what solution sets do you offer? For example, if you sell 4 different things, you would list each one of those out. And then you would list out your key decision makers. You would list out as another column recent activity or prior ops. So you have some context and then next steps.
Exactly.
And you could literally fill that out almost like a clue card. Like, all right, cool. Let me go do some research. Have we ever tried to pitch them this solution set? Oh, we did. They said no, they're using X competitor. And you end up with this clue card of exactly what's going on in your territory. And I've used something like that in the past. And I probably would have been one of those reps that was like, oh, yeah, I can tell you for 20 minutes exactly what's happening. So, good benchmark for any listeners out there. Can you actually talk to leadership at length about where things are? And do you have an easy place to point them? Question about kind of the OG days of sales. I actually came in 2020. And, my company that I ended up at was a federal sales team. So we weren't super optimized on like outreach and sales loft. I think we had Groove at the time, like early days of Groove, and it was not efficient, but we had some automation there. Do you laugh when your reps complain about like 60 dials a day?
Yeah, I mean, because again, cut my teeth, it was 180 dials. And if you didn't do it, you were answering for it. Full stop.
Yeah.
It didn't matter if you booked 0 appointments or 10 appointments. That dashboard banged say 180. So yeah, I mean, when you say now, hey, you make 50 dials a day and There's all these reasons why we can't do it. You can do it. You don't want to do it because it's not the glorious part of the job.
Do you think that attitude existed when you were a rep still, or do you think that's maybe more of like a recent cultural phenomena where we're getting lazier and lazier?
I think it's evolved, and a lot of it, I think, has been influenced by things like LinkedIn, all the cold calling doesn't work stuff, right? So you talk about
Mm,
early days of Groove, right? I really think what kind of crushed the cold calling and the 100 dials a day was when, outreach and sales loft first came along. It was a new
mhm,
mechanism. So that mass blast email, I can catch 20 responses with one click of the button when I would have to dial 500 times for 20 conversations. So it made
right.
people, I want to say it made them lazy because they were being efficient. But when that got away, right, when people were overwhelmed with emails, because initially they were overwhelmed with phone calls where there's no other mechanism. So you had to keep doing it and you had to do it until it worked. But when they got overwhelmed with all the emails, then we pivoted to this hyper personalization. But that was all done through and through email. And the one thing that got lost in the was the phone. And listen,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
saying in 2025, you should put a BDR team out there and take all their tech away and say dial 200 times a day, because now it's turned into this omni-channel approach. And one key of that omni-channel approach is the phone, right? Like
Yep.
you've got to cover all the ways that your buyers want to buy. Some of them are going to answer
Well, let's put it this way. What percent of your team's meetings are booked from the phone?
percentage wise. So again, we're a very heavy land and expand motion. So
Okay.
let me kind of talk about my previous company because that was more
Historically,
in
yeah.
BDR, right? When I got there, they had not set an outbound meeting in years. They, were just met
Whoa.
emails and things like that, but they never had set an
Mhm,
outbound meeting. I came in and we started dialing, and then all of a sudden we set like, 3 1 month. And this was a small team, it was like 6.
mhm.
And then we set like 15. And then before you knew it, we were setting 12, 15, 20 per person. And then the phone started working better. And then we started sharing calls. And then I would bring them all in for
Yeah.
hour, and they'd all dial together. And I was in there listening and coaching. And, I mean, all of a sudden, like a good percentage, I don't know, 15% maybe. But again, dialing an hour a day. So the ones that took the initiative
Yeah.
and dialed more when we're not sitting in this virtual sales floor, were setting more. And the ones that were
Yeah.
okay, I've got this marketing template. I'm going to send this to 4,000 people. Well, they were confused
Mhm.
because they couldn't get through to anyone because they kept getting the domain blocked.
Well, now we're dealing with all the backlash of all of that bad behavior of like Google, cramping down all the way where you can't even hardly send an email anymore without it being spam, or you have to know the person and have their social security number to send them an email.
Yep.
Like dumb, that's not obviously reality, but it seems like it's headed that way. And so this is the age old question. Where do you actually think you're going to continue to get the most success? Is it a land and expand approach where you have to just master your relationships and your champions? Or is the cold outbound model, does it still work? You just have to change it and have multi-domain approaches and stuff like that. Like, what do you
Yeah.
see
I mean,
us heading to?
the answer is both, right? It is a lot less expensive to retain a client than acquire a client. Like we all know that.
Yes.
So you've got to be really, really good at that because I've been with
Mhm.
companies where I'm running sales dev and we've got this massive churn number. And even though we're cranking new meetings in, the company's revenue isn't climbing because we're losing faster than we can win. So you've got to be really, really good at retention. And then
Yeah.
I was just saying, at the omni-channel approach, you've got to use, a sales loft and outreach. All those tools are great, but you've got to use them in the proper manner. And you've got to understand that every single person in one of your cadences or sequences wants to buy a different way. And they may read your email and never reply, but they may go to your website. And that's when your chatbot person comes in. And then maybe you call them 3 days later to follow up on your email and they answer the phone and they want to have a conversation. So like I look at it like a toolbox. And as a leader,
Yeah.
I've got to give them as many tools as humanly possible to put in their toolbox. They have
Mm.
to ensure that they're using them all, right? The analogy I use is
Sure.
if I went to a carpenter and said, "Can you build me a house?" They're going to say, "Sure." If I hand them just a saw and walk away, they can't do it. They need all the other tools.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it's I think like that's the biggest thing that we've been trying to figure out for the last 12 months, and it's going to continue to be a trend. And you're seeing,
Yeah.
companies pop up that try to solve for multiple things instead of just being pigeonholed into, I'm just your data tool. I'm just your
Right.
tool. I'm just your call coaching tool. There's more companies popping up to do all of that now.
Yeah. Well, and that's a different issue because they have to show that they are growing revenue and they've been massively overfunded and all of that. But one of the counter perspectives to what you just said, and by the way, I'm like boots on the ground, SDR leader, love SDR for life. But a counter perspective that's kind of cropping up is your SDRs should only be on the phones because you should have a fully automated outbound system. Your inbound channels should be fully dialed in and automated, and demos shouldn't even be qualified by SDRs anymore. You should take care of that in the funnel, give it directly to the AEs to go close. And it's more of this like automated system where the human thing that we're paying these SDRs to do that a robot can't do is pick up a phone and call people. So do you disagree with that approach where you're trying to automate as much as you can aside from just dialing?
Like everything else, automation has its place. But I think if you fully automate a sales cycle up until it's time for an AE to close it, people are going to get bored with the process. I mean, think about like you call the
Mm.
doctor's office to make an appointment and you got to listen to the phone tree, press this, press that, do this, do that. Like I'm trying to write you a check. I'm trying to buy something from you. Make it easy
Yeah.
for me. Don't make me
Yeah.
have to jump through hoops just to talk to somebody. I had a personal experience with a company I worked for a long time. I knew my renewal date was coming up. I said, "Hey, let's just renew." And they kept trying to sell me more and sell me, and I didn't want more. I just wanted the same thing.
Mm.
And I got so frustrated. I went all the way to the VP. I was like, "I am just trying to hand you a $50,000 check and you won't take it." I ended up churning and going somewhere else
Wow.
because that chatbot that it started with. And then like the CSM is trained to upsell and cross sell. Like, I didn't want any of that. You got to understand what your buyers want. And I do think experience is important, right? The first time I speak to you as a potential client begins me forming my opinion of you, whether I want to do business with you a long time. But
Correct.
even if you win me over the first time and you sell me and I buy the tool's okay, but like the user experience is terrible, so I can't talk to a human being when I have when I have a problem. Like there's nothing more
Yeah.
frustrating when my was broken and I'm trying to type things into chatbots and it's giving me like, click, what are these four options? What can I help? And like that's not what I just explained about. Like no one enjoys that
Right.
experience. There's a place for automation. Automation's great for like lead scoring and routing and things like that. But at some
Mhm.
point, we live in a human to human world. People buy from humans. People buy from people that they like. It's who they want to do business with.
Yeah.
It's been that way since before computers even existed. And like that human element isn't going away. So until you have some sort of an automated bot doing all the purchasing, you can't have an automated bot doing all of the selling and all of the communicating.
Yep. Yep. 100%. One of the things you talked about with a lot of experience is being able to, onboard and look for the right kind of SDR. Like, what are those traits? And at the end of the day, it's hard work. Can you walk through high level, like first 90 days for a new hire, whether it's an SDR or an AE? What are those things that you need them to hit for them to know, well, for you to know that they're going to be a good rep? Like, what do you build into your onboarding
Yeah,
process?
I mean, when we're talking about like BDR specifically, I think the biggest thing is I want them to hit their activity milestone. If the number is, I don't know, 100 emails and 100 calls, right, for the sake of argument, that's what they have to do every day. We know they're not going to do that on day one out of training. So like build those benchmarks, right? Get to 20, do 20 for a week, get to 60. So step number one is, are you hitting those daily KPIs? I don't care about results yet. You're on ramp, you're not carrying a quota. But what I want to see is like the work ethic piece. And then the biggest thing for me, and I say this all the time, especially to reps that come in and struggle, I want to hear from you. Like if I'm your direct,
Yes.
if I am so much more worried about the person that comes into my organization, books a bunch of meetings or makes a couple of sales, and they're off and running and crushing it. But I'm not
Mhm.
asking questions. They're not curious. They're just doing whatever they're doing on an island. I am much more worried
Yeah.
about that person than I am about the person who was like me, who couldn't get out of their own way, but was asking the
Mhm.
questions and was really curious and was eager and was just trying to understand the process. Because in my experience, I've hired hundreds, if not thousands of people. The person that comes out of the gate slow and understands the process and understands the company and really learns the right way to do it will have that upward trajectory and they'll be there for a long time. That person that comes out of
Yeah.
the gate, what you typically learn is Those are like leading indicators that you're seeing. Or, hey, I booked a bunch of meetings. Yeah, that's great. But then those meetings start to happen and they're no-shows, or they're with the wrong person, or there's nothing there. And then that person spirals. And now their ramp time is gone. They haven't asked questions. And you find out they were just really good at twisting arms of lower level people to get them to take a call.
Yeah.
Now they're back at square one. The exec team, my bosses, are saying, what the heck happened to Joe over here? This guy was crushing it. Now he's not doing anything.
Yep. I've had a few of those reps also, 100%. But I think the ownership as the leaders is on us. So how would you approach a rep like that? They came in, they're crushing early success, but they're lone wolfing, they're isolating.
Mhm.
You don't hear from them much. What do you tell them?
I mean, they're hearing from me a lot is what ends up happening. Like they're the ones that get 2
Mm.
one-on-ones a week. They're the ones that every time I see I booked a meeting, I'm calling them, walk me through it. What was the title? Where are they? What are they looking for? What's their pain? And most of the time, it's like, well, I didn't really get that. They just want a discovery call. Like, they don't want a discovery call. You twisted their arm into giving you 30 minutes. They probably said yes to get you off the phone. Like that's really what happened. And then the other thing is like the recorded software, right? If you book a meeting and I'm concerned about the way you're going about it, I just probably want to call it, hey, walk me through your sales process here. And then, I'll start
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah.
Why didn't you uncover a pig? Why didn't you ask this here? I think a lot of times you'll hear, yeah, like I'm open to talk. And then they'll give well, I'll throw you an invite for next Tuesday. If that time doesn't work, feel free to move it. Like that meeting's not happening. We all know it's not happening.
Yeah.
But it looks really good on
Yeah.
the dashboard when you're in week 2. It looks terrible on the commission check in week 6 because it never happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'm guilty as a leader of looking at just the top line KPI of like, oh, they booked a meeting, they're doing well. I'm going to go focus on the people that are struggling.
Mhm.
And then to your point, it catches up in a few weeks where it's like, oh crap, this person's totally falling apart now. I have no idea where they're struggling. And so that's a conviction and a check for myself of like, you can't just look at a meeting booked. You need to press in there and make sure this new hire understands what they just did and why it matters and where else they can grow. And so I'm literally replaying right now images in my head of Slack notifications. So and so booked a meeting and I'm just in the chat. Yeah, woohoo. No follow up, no verification on my side, no curiosity from me of what did you learn? How did that feel? Like, what's your next step here? So, man, that's a really good check for
Yeah.
myself.
And like one of the easy ways to combat that as a leader, the most effective thing that I've done is I've implemented, I used to call like button up sheets, right? Where there's a list
Mm.
of questions, probably 6 or 7 things that you need to send to the account executive that's taking that meeting. So like, yeah, sure, some
Yeah.
table stakes, name, title, company, time, date, but like pain point, current tool, and like if they may not get all of them, but if they're all blank every time, I know they're just throwing stuff over the wall and praying that something sticks. All new hires are treated equal. Because if you've got someone on the team that's been there for 2.5 years, they're a top performer, sure, you can spend a little less time there. But if
Yeah.
you've like hit
Yeah.
6-month mark, you're off ramp and you've hit your quarter a bunch of times, you are the same as that person that I hired that is, light years behind you on the dash. Because I know the
Mm.
leveling off moments where your stuff falls apart and their stuff clicks.
Yeah. That brings up a curiosity question for you. And this is a broad generalization. We're not talking about any specific reps here at all. But in general, have you hired better hiring for prior experience or actually hiring someone who's green?
So in the BDR world, I think I actually like over the years did a really good job of hiring and figuring out a couple of key things that I would look for. And I will tell you, I don't need a resume to interview somebody for a BDR role. It's just
Wow. What are those things? Break it down.
there's 3, and I mentioned a few of them already. Grit is number 1. Coachability is number 2, and the reasons why those are important is obvious. And the last one is intrinsic motivation. Again, I
Yeah.
think I said it earlier, I can teach you how to pitch, I can teach you how to close, I can teach you how to use the CRM and all the tools. I can't teach you to care. I can't teach that.
Mhm.
If you didn't come in the door with that, I made a terrible hire, and that's on me. So I'll tell you a real quick story about this. I was at a company, a startup. We were very, very young, but we were like just moving fast, hyper growth, like nothing I've ever experienced in my career. We threw a happy hour because the team did a benchmark for them. So we go down to we actually went to the yard house that was like in the bottom of our building. And I went down, I talked to the bartender, basically like, hey, like, here's my corporate card. This group's with us. Just bring whatever and I'll take care of it at the end of the night. She said, great. So as I was paying the tax, she said, wow, like you guys are amazing. Like, what a great company. I wish I could get out of the service industry and find a job like that. I'm like, well, you can. Like a lot of it's kind of entry level. She said, yeah, but no one's going to hire me, no experience. And I gave her my card. I said, if you're serious, call me. So she did. And I said, before work tomorrow, I walked around the building, talked about the job. And I said, go home and do some research and I'll interview you. I ended up hiring her. She is one of the top 3 outbound BDRs I ever hired in my life. She became, as that team grew, I needed managers. She became one of my first 2 managers. She then became my director as I got promoted up to VP. She became director under me. She's now a director of sales for a different company, and she's probably W-2ing around 400K. And all that is,
I literally have chills.
yeah,
I don't know if the camera can see this, but I'm like, yes,
yeah,
this is it. This is the Rocky story. I love it.
yeah. And my whole thought process on her was she was personable. Like she works in the service industry, so she has the being
Mhm.
instantly likable thing done. She's probably not afraid to talk to people. I just had to figure out if she was a hard worker. And as it turned out,
Yeah.
I've never met anyone that works harder than she does. Like she's that person I almost had to like threaten to have IT turn her laptop off so she'd shut off on the weekend. And then I've
Wow.
got a bunch of
Wow.
other stories like that where if you were a BDR leader, manager, director, whatever, and her resume hit your desk with no context, the recruiter would have tossed it. You never would have even seen it.
Right.
So with
Right.
BDRs, I would always
Yeah.
tell my recruiters if they apply, send me the profile. Like don't just discard anybody
Yeah.
without showing it to me. Because like it is the entry
Yeah.
level, it is the gateway, and she became an AE and then a manager and a director. Like she did it all, and she's crushing it. So, I mean, she'll be a CRO someday, no doubt in my mind. Hopefully, she'll give me a job.
Yeah. Well, you've hired over hundreds of SDR BDRs. I've hired nearly 100 over a span of a couple of years, and I fully agree those are the 3 things. It's the grit, it's the coachability, and it's the intrinsic motivation. Consistently, my best hires have had those 3 things in spades. I hired someone who was a first generation immigrant from Asia. Honestly, like her English was not even very clear. It was one of those where I was like, are people going to think she's like an offshore like scammer type thing? Like I was really debating that in my head interviewing her, but she told me that she had been doing door-to-door sales, sleeping in her car to make things happen, and that she had to be successful because her whole entire family back in Asia was depending on her success. Right when she told me that, I pretty much in my head was like, you're hired. Like, I will teach you all of this. I just want you to care more than I care. And you do. So let's make this happen.
Yeah, yeah, you're exactly. I mean, I've had hard conversations with a lot of reps over the years. I said, I can't care about your success more than you do, and that's kind of what you're saying. She proved to you there, like she can't fail, and as a leader, that's all that you want.
Yeah. And by the way, if your leader ever comes and tells you that they can't care about your success more than you do, you're probably not in a good spot right now. And you should probably like decide if you're going to commit to sales or not, because that's not a good conversation to have with a rep. I've been there too.
For sure. And I think the one other thing on hiring, right? You talked about like hiring profiles and all that. I actually
Yeah.
get concerned when the person comes to me with like 8 years of BDR experience at 5 different companies, right? Because
Correct.
like if the numbers were as great in real life as they're telling me on their resume, they'd be an AE somewhere. Sure, anybody can land at a bad company. Anybody can have a tough go with things. So like a little bit of job experience is great, but if you come in and tell me I want to be an AE, like I'm fighting for it. I had all these amazing numbers at 6 previous companies, but they wouldn't grow me. So now I'm looking for my next thing. But oh, by the way, I'm already unemployed. Like that's a massive red flag. Give me the person that's never
Yeah.
done this and is just hungry.
Agreed. Yeah, I will say also with full confidence and certainty, 100% of hires I've made like that with the extensive BDR resume have been bad hires. 100%.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's someone out there who can break the mold. What I would encourage those people to do, honestly, is like go find more of a full cycle sales role at that point. Leverage your experience to get into full cycle at a junior level, then go that route, because it's really hard for us leaders to look at that and go, well, why is this going to be any different? Like, what about all the 5 other jobs you've had didn't work out where this is different?
Right. And there is a distinct difference between that job hopper who like all the indications are there that they just haven't done a good job and the person that's chosen BDR as a career, fits into their life better, whatever.
Yes.
Like I've certainly hired those folks who are in their 40s and they've had 3 or 4 BDR gigs, but they've got, 4 years here, 2.5 years there. And when you ask them about it,
Yeah.
you say like, this is what I love. right? My
Yeah.
significant other has a job that travels a ton. I can't take an AE role because I'm going to work more of a 9 to 5 because I got to take care of the kids. Like, I get that. I respect that. That's totally different than the first scenario I just described.
Then I've been trying to promote for 5 years and every company's mean to me. Like that doesn't really track.
Right. Right.
Joe, last question for you before we roll out of here. It's honestly, it's so refreshing talking to someone with so much experience. I feel like this could be like the first quarter of a conversation with you. Last question I have, a little more fun, a little more inspiring. What's a favorite quote that you live by?
Yeah. I mean, well, that I live by or that I manage the team by. I think, the Kevin Durant
Both.
one.
Let's both.
I mean, the Kevin Durant one has always kind of been my go-to.
Mhm.
One of the other ones that I always think of, and I don't know, I think it just was anonymous, but in elementary school, I remember this poster on the wall, and it said with a stack of books, "The secret to getting ahead is getting started." And I think in the sales
Mm.
world, it's so relevant because you come in day one of the quarter, and I've got to book 50 meetings, or I've got to sell $3 million worth of whatever. And that number's overwhelming. But if you just get started, like, go get one. And I said this to my BDRs, all my BDRs ever. Day one, when they're struggling, it's like, listen, like, just go get me one. You can't get to 30. You can't get 30 meetings today. It's not going to happen. Go get me one. And then get me one tomorrow. And get me one the next day. And you know what? We have 24 sales days in this month. Once or twice you'll fall into two. And then guess what? We're at the end of the month and there's your 30. But if you're sitting here on day one thinking about 30 without being worried about 1 through 29, you've already spun yourself out and lost.
It ain't gonna happen. You know, it's so wild in my mind's eye right now. I see you, mature, well, veteran, seasoned, battle tested sales leader coming into that office and seeing 29-year-old Joe Venuti, seeing him book one meeting and having this conversation. Hey, man, don't worry about the rest. Can you get the next one?
Yeah.
And here you are years later with so many war stories to tell. It's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing is, it kind of came from, again, once I hit my stride at the appointment setting company, I got promoted to senior and then I made executive. So again, like, my number was like 27, 28, 29. Then as senior, it was like 35. But as executive, it's like 50. And the first day I was an executive, it was the first of the month. I come in and I don't book a meeting. And I'm like, that hasn't happened forever. Then I came in the second day, the third meeting. And one of the more experienced guys is like, what's up with you? I'm like, I don't know. I get all these meetings occurring from last month. I got to do 53. Like, I don't know how I'm going to get there. And he's like, dude, don't worry about that. You got all month. And then I did. I kind of went back to my desk. I was like, all right, Joe, you've done this. And I actually would keep every meeting I booked. I had a stack of papers like this, the sheets I would fill out. I had that whole thing. There was like 1,000 of them at this point. And I would look at that whenever I was struggling, like, you can do this. You've done it 1,000 times. Go do it one more time. And then lo and behold, I put up like 6 meetings that day and I was back on track.
Well, y'all got to hear just now years of sales experience, probably multiple millions of dollars of pipeline generated through Joe, your wisdom, your knowledge, how you've been leading your team. So thank you sincerely for sharing with the community and I appreciate your time today.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Modern Sales Leader Podcast. That was fire. I feel so bad as a leader that I've let my reps book meetings and celebrate them, but not actually have gone and investigated the quality, hampering their learning and ramp time. So I feel like I learned a lot during that episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for the next one.